And of course, this whole thing starts off with, the devil and God having this discussion about how good of a servant Job is, and Satan challenging God's statement, basically saying that Job only served him because of the hedge that he put around him, and that he had all these many blessings, and so Job was a servant serving God because of those things. So God allows the devil to have all these bad things happen to Job. He loses his children, he loses his livestock, he loses his servants. All of these things happen in a matter of minutes. And then Job, after all these things, he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we kind of talked a little bit about what that response meant, and what Job must have been feeling at that time. So we got into chapter 2, and the same scenario happens again. The devil comes to a meeting, and God talks about Job, brags on Job, and Satan attacks it again, saying, well, he's willing to give up all this stuff. He doesn't care about anybody else. He's selfish, and all but just as long as you don't allow me to touch him, he's gonna continue to serve you. And so once again, God gives him permission to go and cause havoc for Job, and Job gets these boils, and that's where we're at now. So we're going to pick up and let's read Job 2, 1 through 10 is what I want to have read first here. One of the guys back there is getting it, I think, to read here.
On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present themselves before him. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming about the earth and back and forth on it. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. He maintains his high integrity. Through you incite me against him without any reason. Skin for sin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, surely, are you sure you're maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin what he said.
All right, so we see this scene repeat itself, like I said, where God says, hey, have you seen what how good Job is and what he's done? And then the devil attacks and says, well, he's not doing it out of good motives. It's only for himself. And then, so now Job is smitten with sores and sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. So he's covered in these painful things. And so at that point, Job's wife says to him, why don't you just curse God and die? And those of us, I think many of us are familiar with the story of Job, and we know about that statement. And I think many of us have always, have looked at that as her being weak or not having the relationship with God that Job did, or things like that. And that certainly is a possibility, that she didn't have that relationship or the faith in God that Job did. But there are some other possibilities that we were kind of discussing as far as reasons she might have said that. Why do you think she asks him that question? What are some reasons other than just she's, not having faith in God.
It could be just concern for his physical well-being, with him in pain all the time.
Yeah, could it get any worse than this? Yeah, so we talked about that they felt like, your prosperity or your adversity was, the common thought of the day was that you either profited or were to the detriment, depending on whether you were good or bad. So in this case, she may be saying, you've done something bad. Why don't you do the worst thing you can possibly do and curse God and die? So that certainly is a possibility of what she was thinking there. What other reasons might there be?
Like it was said last week, she lost everything as well.
Right, she might have just been bitter at this point. Right.
Yeah, she's bitter.
And who's she bitter towards is a question. Is she bitter towards God, or is she bitter towards Job? Does she think, well, you sinned and brought this on us, and so that's a possibility that she's bitter towards one of those people, or God. God's not a person, but
Could she have the same mindset of Job's friends?
yeah. Well, that Job had sinned, and exactly that he had done something in that case. So yeah, did Job do something that he was being punished for?
Job even says she talks like one of the foolish women. So, in other words, she was just spouting off,
Saying something without thought. Yeah, she was saying something without thinking about it or what that meant. Yeah, that's possible. She may have thought God was unfair and been angry with God. But that one thing we know for sure is that they definitely thought that that punishment was connected to doing wrong, which it is, but like directly in this case, like materially, because well, in fact, as an example of this, even in Jesus' time, John chapter 9, look at what the disciples say to Jesus in John chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. It says, "And as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?'" So you see a direct, like, who sinned, this man or his parents? Jesus answered, "It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was in order that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me, as long as it is day. Night is coming when no man can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied this clay to his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. And so he went away and washed and came back seeing. Now, I read a little bit more there than I needed to just because Jimmy pointed this out. This is a little bit of an odd miracle that Jesus does here, because why does he create the mud and out of spit and then rub it on the person's eyes? And Jimmy covered that, and we're not going to cover that today, but it was an interesting story. But the question that they ask, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? First off, when you think about that question, it doesn't really make sense, because the person, although maybe they believed that people were born in sin, but he hadn't been born yet, so he couldn't have committed a sin to have been born blind. So really the question they're asking is, did his parents do something, or is this just something that was done to him for his future sins, I guess, or what? But the question itself implies that this condition of this person was because of sin. Now then, do we see today, is it possible that sin does create conditions like this? But yes. But as far as this kind of a condition, yeah, we do. I mean, there's birth defects that are caused from people sinning. Like we see, so it is possible that a child can suffer something physical ailment because of the parent's sin. So it's not an outlandish question in that way, that a person might be born a certain way because of sin. But that wasn't the point. I don't think that was the point they were making or what they were thinking. But certainly today we do see people punished because of sin in the way that God has established things. You know, I mean, if you do certain things, there are potentially certain consequences to those things. So it's possible, anyway, as far as that goes. But it's not always linked, and that's kind of the discussion that we're going to see throughout Job. So anyway, Job's wife probably thought that God was unfair, and that is a popular explanation for suffering, but it's contrary to God's nature. If God's unfair, we're in a lot of trouble, right? Everything falls as far as our belief in God if God is unfair. So,
When you were talking about speaking and stuff, I think sometimes we as human beings will say things that we shouldn't have.
right, yeah, we talked about that last week in the sermon, right? We, out of anger, we'll say something that's not right. So yeah, that's quite possible, yeah. Many people arrive at the conclusion that God's unfair when they only consider empirical evidence, what we can see, what you know, from our own viewpoint. And we have to consider God's viewpoint is different than our viewpoint, and that he knows things that we don't know, and there's certainly a higher point of view, and that's, like I said, a lot of what we'll see discussed in Job. You know, what don't we know? All right, but here again, what we see happening is Satan attacking Job, and we know that Satan will use various methods to attack us. He caused Job to lose his material blessings first, right? And then his health. And then, who was the one person that was left alive in Job's life? His wife. And so, at that point, temptation to do wrong comes from his wife, who was left alive. You know, God allows tests to prove our allegiance to him. Let's flip over to James chapter 1. Verse 2, it says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And then dropping down to 12, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him." So when we deal with temptation, every time we deal with temptation, it's an opportunity to demonstrate our faith in God. You know, how can we prepare to deal with temptation? Or how should we go about our lives knowing that we are going to be tempted to do wrong at times? What kind of things do we need to do to be prepared for that? What's that? Pray. Pray to God. Stay in God's word. Those are certainly good things to do.
And careful who you associate with.
Careful about our association with things. Yep. And specifically what we do, because like I said, like if we know we're tempted in a certain area, we should probably, not go to that area. You know, like if there's a, and we can't always stay away from toxic people, but as much as possible, if we know that there's a problem, you can try to stay away from that.
No, the idea of staying away from things is one thing, but we must go to God always
Right.
first.
So yeah, that's what we talked about. Yeah, with
Way is one thing.
Debbie and Elton had said, yeah, pray and go to God's word. So yeah, those are two things. Now there again, we have to be very intentional, I think, when you're talking about that. Like just reading the Bible without giving thought to what we're trying to do or what we need to do, or just praying without being intentional about it, like a repetitious prayer that doesn't mean anything, that you're not thinking about. Like giving thought to prayer for strength or for courage, like what you had said this morning, or And what does that mean then? What are we praying for specifically? So those kind of things, it's intentional, like giving thought, not just going through the motions. I think there's a couple things. First off, we have to expect it. We know it's coming. We know that there's going to be problems coming that we're going to be tempted to do wrong in. And we talked about that last week in the sermon about what kind of things, where does that come from? What kind of situations might cause us to do wrong? You know, you could do wrong out of anger. You could have somebody else influence you toward it. You could, you could desire it and just decide that you want to do it. So there's a number of different avenues that we can be tempted through. But we should expect temptation. Christians should expect that Satan will launch attacks against us. And God tells us that he will not allow us to be tested beyond what we can bear. 2 Peter 2:9 it says, then the Lord knows how to, let's back up, and this is a part of a long thing, but a long part where Peter's talking about people who were not rescued. But let's go to 8 and just say, for by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, talking about Lot, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day with their lawless needs. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority. And then he talks a little bit about it. So here, like I said, he's listing how God doesn't spare these people who do wrong, but he can rescue the godly from temptation. And then, of course, 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. You know, that reminds me of something. I was talking with somebody at work this week, and we were talking a little bit about just some of their views on religion or other views that they had heard. And I just commented, and it made me think about how we always see things from our point of view. So like in our point of view, we see like things deteriorating in our country, morality deteriorating and things going badly. And we may think, well, this is just horrible. But in reality, like look at this passage, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. It's always been that way. We've been sheltered because we're used to it a certain way, and it's been that way for all of our lifetimes. But in reality, sin has always been sin, and it's always been here. Well, not always, but ever since we fell in the Garden of Eden, it's always been here. You can see early on that people are depraved. I mean, God flooded the earth because of how depraved people were. You can see how Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because of depravity. Like, these things have always been the case. And so we're not ever tempted beyond what's normal. It's always been here. But it says God is faithful and will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. And that's what we were talking about. Like, do we put ourselves intentionally in situations that we're weak in? Like, if we're weak in something, we probably shouldn't go there. We should avoid it. If it's, and what I'm saying in a certain situation, sometimes you can't avoid it. But there's certain things that we can avoid. There's things that we know, if I go there, I'm likely to do whatever this is, and I should avoid that. And I'm not putting anything specific on that, because you can put it in for yourself. Whatever it is for you that is that weakness, try to avoid it if you can. We also need to be aware of temptation, that look to detect it. We have to increase our ability to detect areas that are dangerous to us, like what I was just talking about. Like, Satan wants to influence us without us even being aware that it is coming from him. And as we talked about in the past, one of his most powerful tools is to just tweak the truth, right? Just a little bit. Make it appear that it's good. And how many people do we know that feel like everything's all good, but they haven't obeyed God, or they're not Christians, or things like that. So we have to really sharpen our powers of discernment and spiritual awareness. And how can we do this? Well, the things that we were just talking about, right? Prayer, getting into God's Word, thinking through things, not just going through the motions. These things can help us to sharpen that. And then, of course, we have to reject it. Whenever the temptation comes, we have to be aware of it and reject it. Once we have detected that we're being tempted, flee from it. So just like what we were talking about, if we have a disposition to do something, we should avoid it. Let's look at Matthew chapter 5. And I think that this is Jesus' point here in Matthew chapter 5, 29 and 30. He says, "And if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you, for it is better for you that one of the parts of your body perish than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you, for it is better for you that one of the parts of your body perish than for your whole body to go into hell." So, we've talked, I don't remember if I've said it specifically here, but I know I've talked about it somewhere along the way as far as, is God actually telling us to destroy our bodies? That's not really his point of what he's making here. He's saying this is how important it is that you do what's right. It's better to lose your hand or to lose your eye and not be able to see than it is, throughout your life here, than it would be to go to hell. So he's emphasizing the temporary, this is temporary, and it's better to go through life without some of the things that we should have or could have than it is to go to hell. So we have to avoid the things that are tempting us. I think that, to me, that's what he's indicating.
I think another case, that's very similar to that is where in Matthew 18, Jesus said it would be better for somebody to have a large millstone tied around his neck and be drowned in the depth of the sea than cause one of my little ones to stumble. Clearly, he's not advocating that we
Right. Right.
every time they harm somebody or dismember ourselves every time there's a temptation. He's saying this would be better. It's kind of hyperbole.
Yeah, it's an emphasis. Yeah.
Very serious. These are very serious infractions.
Right.
And you guys need to take it really, really heavily and seriously.
Right. Yeah. That's what I think. Yeah, it's using exaggeration to emphasize how important this is. That one's even interesting to me because it's just like, what difference does it make how you die or any of that as far as if you're going to hell? Like of course it would be better for anything to happen bad to us here than to go to hell eternally.
But it gives
So,
these visual depictions.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's like, that's really bad, yeah. If you think about what it would be like to just be drugged down into the bottom of the ocean with a stone, and yeah, that's not a pleasant way to go. So yeah, certainly it emphasizes the point. All right, so after anyway, the point here is that temptation can come from places we don't necessarily expect, or in this case, his wife was left, was not killed in this whole thing, where his kids were killed and all of these bad things happened, but then she's used in a bad way to tempt Job to do what he's not supposed to do. So do you think that Job understands why he's suffering? Not really. But his response is interesting. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not adversity? And that's pretty much, that's just the truth, right? That's the way we should be able to accept both. And I think last week we had an emphasis on we should be the same person no matter what we're going through, no matter what our circumstances are around us. It shouldn't change our character or who we are. And that you can see the contrast here between Job and his wife. Job's character stays true through all of these circumstances, while his wife changes and says, well, why don't you curse God and die? So we need, how can we stay that same person? How can we be that person throughout whatever the circumstance? And it goes back to preparation, I think. How much of a relationship do we have with God? How much do we study? How firm is our foundation? How faithful are we? Because, like I said, we're all gonna deal with something at some point in our life. I mean, unless we're killed at a young age, and then that's going to be on somebody else then, not on ourselves. Like we're all going to deal with some kind of problems as we go through life. So we know that the suffering is going to come, and it's just so we should be prepared for it before it hits us. Right. We should, if we get in the habit of going to God first. Yeah. So Job went to God, goes to God first, right?
If we would always remember God is watching, that might help us.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true as well. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and read the last part of Job here. If one of you back there want to read. Not the last part of Job. Job chapter 2, excuse me. Let's read Job chapter 2, beginning in verse 11 through the end of the chapter.
When Job's three friends, Eliphaz and Temanite and Bildad, boy, those are tough names, the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was.
Okay, so what do we know about Job's three friends? Well, what's that? What's that?
Weird names.
Weird names, yeah. They had good intentions. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that here. They had good intentions. What we know about them pretty much comes from what we read right here in the scripture. Eliphaz was a resident of the city of Teman in Uz, and this town was famous for its wise men. Jeremiah 49:7. Jeremiah 49:7 says, concerning Edom, thus says the Lord of hosts, is there no longer any wisdom in Teman? Has good counsel been lost to the prudent? Has their wisdom decayed? So they're used as an example of they were wise. What's happened? We know that Bildad lived in a nearby area inhabited by the descendants of Shua, and that is one of Abraham's sons through Keturah. And then Zophar lived in the nearby area of Namath, or however Dave pronounced that one, Namath. So all three were probably wealthy and respected, since they were friends with Job, who was, as we talked about earlier, the greatest man in the East, both wealth and respect and righteousness and all those things. All right, so now going back a little bit to what Sharon says, what do you think of the way Job's friends responded to his situation? They come with good intentions, right? So what do you think about what they do here?
The
They're devoted. That's something we can learn, yep, definitely. They went to him.
They shared in his suffering because they tore their robes, they threw dust on themselves, and they sat quietly.
Yep, they share in his suffering. What else do we see? I think all those things are definitely good things and important for us that we can learn. What do they do initially? They just come and sit with him, right? There's no indication that there's much said here at all, if anything.
And they wept.
They wept.
They were sharing his sorrow.
Yep, they share the sorrow. They indicate that they're sharing in his sorrow through the different things that we see there. And then they just sit. Yep, they came to sympathize. So are there times when it is preferable that we be silent? There were some definites there, yeah. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit with someone.
Just be there.
Just be there for them. Yep. I know a lot of us feel like we have to solve problems and we help people through talking. Sometimes that's not the best.
Silence is golden.
So, yeah, sometimes it's golden. So sometimes it may be just as good to let someone know we're there for them without trying to say something, profound. So we need to keep that in mind. Anything else that we see from this initial? Of course, this is for those of you who know the rest of the story, which I assume most of you do, this is really the best thing they do, right? Like after this, it goes downhill from here. When they start opening their mouths, which is part of the reason we're saying this, when they start opening their mouths, it's not such a good encouragement for Job, right? And things don't go well. So sometimes silence is our best avenue to support someone.
Because I see that as sometimes we'll say the wrong.
Because we can say the wrong thing, yeah. Now that doesn't mean that we should always be scared to talk to someone when they're suffering or that there's not things we can't say to help someone. But it means we better think about what we're saying and what we're doing.
I think it's better to wait for them to say something and then respond.
That may be true. In some cases, it may be better to wait for someone, but in some cases, they may take that as a you don't care as well. So I don't think there's a 100% way to say this is how we should react in all circumstances or anything like that. I think we just have to. How many times am I going to say that? I think we should just think about what we're going to say or what we're going to do before we have to plan it out and not just react or say something dumb. There's a lot of times that we do put our foot in our mouth, when we say without thinking it through.
I think it helps too to know the person.
Exactly.
How
Mm-hmm.
they'll take it or how they'll respond.
And then to listen to if they tell you, not right now, don't just keep pushing. If someone tells you they don't want to talk to you right now, we should listen to that. So I think, like I said, there's a lot of variables and a lot of things that have to be thought about. There's no one right way to do it, but we certainly have to put thought into it. Did I see somebody over there saying something?
I kind of made a gesture that sometimes I think, like everybody has a different perspective on that, I think, because sometimes I will only want to, there's only certain people that I will listen to. I listen to everybody, but it doesn't mean the same.
Right, yeah, you have certain people that you listen to their advice more than others, yeah. Certainly that's the case too. And kind of knowing how our role to that person can be helpful as far as knowing where, what they would think of what we have to say.
I think too is to friends now, they've seen how, they didn't even recognize. They didn't even recognize.
Yeah, couldn't even recognize them, yeah.
And when they did tear up their clothes and robes, they looked up to heaven. They did this looking up towards heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't that they were doing it themselves, they were doing
Yeah, that was for the sorrow they felt for him. And that's a common thing as far as we see in the Bible, that some of these ways that they illustrated their grief, we don't do that as much today. I mean, I guess it would be comparable to wearing black to a funeral or something like that, that they're tearing their robe and putting dust over their heads. Those were illustrations of how they felt, how they mourned. Yeah. So we see that in other places throughout especially in the Old Testament, that's how they reacted to those things.
Why do we wear black and white?
I think it's just a tradition to illustrate mourning, I think, is what it is. All right, so just in summary for chapter 2, once again we see God giving permission to Satan to cause problems for Job. Satan attacking Job, I forget the word now. His motivation for serving God. And just as a question, kind of to sum this up, if no evil can happen to people without God's permission, kind of like what we talked about before, does that cause a problem in your mind? Does that cause you to question God? Or are you able to work through it and what that means? And that's, I throw that out there not intending to answer that right now with our couple of minutes that we have left, but just to kind of think through, what does evil and suffering and all these things that we see going on around us, what does that do to our faith in God? How does that color, or does it cause any doubt in your mind about what God says in his word or those kind of things? And that's kind of where we're going to go as we talk through. Next week I was intending to do some of it this week, but we're already just about out of time. So we're going to jump to the end of the book and hit the conclusion next week. And then from there, we're going to talk about some of those questions that I just raised. And we'll spend some time dealing with that before we go through the rest of the book. Elton?
That's kind of like when God answered Job, who are you to question me?
Right.
Who am I to question God?
Right. Well, and is it wrong to question God? No. It depends on what our motives are as far as how we're questioning God. But if we approach it from the fact that God is superior, God is God, he's omnipotent, all-powerful, and then approach it from that direction versus trying to contradict God or to bring him down to our level, there's a big difference in going about our questioning in those two different ways. So, all right, well, we will pick back up here next week, and we will be back for worship in about 15, 16 minutes.